Have you ever seen these letters before and wondered what they mean? Or have you ever heard anyone say, my personality type is an ISFP or I'm an ESTJ and wondered, okay, well, what does that actually mean? So, my name is Brielle. I'm an organizational psychology instructor and I'm also a master certified Myers-Briggs Type Indicator practitioner. And I want to take a few moments to just explain this a little bit more so that everyone can have an understanding of what these 16 personalities actually look like. We know that in the field of personality psychology, personality is complex, it's multifaceted, so we can't put people in boxes. But I want to break down what these 16 types actually mean. So I'd like to invite you to engage in an activity that I do with teams, with students, and it's called a personality type estimate. And so I'm going to give you an overview of each of the dichotomies, and you're going to select which preference resonates with you the most. So, the four categories I'm going to go over: introversion and extroversion, which is how we're energized. Then we'll look at the mental process of how we take in information, which is known as sensing and intuition. And then we'll look at how we make decisions and come to conclusions, which is known as the thinking and feeling dichotomy. And then we look at how we approach deadlines, which is the judging and perceiving preference pair. So as I go through each of these, I want you to understand that, like I said, personality is complex. And so we all move back and forth across these spectrums. It's going to be different for all of us because we have different preferences, we have different life experiences, our environments have been different, and that has helped to shape our personality. So as I go through each one of these with a brief, very brief explanation, I just want you to select which one sounds the most like you. So let's start with how we get our energy. And we're going to talk about introversion and extroversion. And one thing I want to talk about here is this has nothing to do with how social you are or antisocial you are. This is strictly how you are energized. So the analogy I like to use is, let's say you're an introvert. Introverts wake up with a bag full of coins. Let's say that's their energy. As they're moving throughout their day, they are giving coins away. As they're interacting with people, as they're going through their environment, when they get home or at the end of their day, their bag is empty, and so they need to recharge. Extroverts, on the other hand, maybe they wake up with a bag that's empty. As they're going throughout their day, through their environments, socially interacting, or just moving throughout their day, they are gaining coins. They're getting energy. So by the time they get home, they've been recharged. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. If you have a preference for introversion, you typically trust and are most comfortable with your inner world. You may have a rich imagination. You like to work things out by reflecting, and you like to get alone to do some of your mental processing. Maybe you focus in depth on a few interests, and you will take initiative when the situation requires. Extroverts, on the other hand, trust and are most comfortable with the outer world, and this can look different for everyone. They may have broad interests in many areas. They may learn best by talking things through, and they will communicate their thoughts along the way and are comfortable taking initiative in social situations. So, one of the challenges we see here in this dichotomy in the area of communication, if you are in a relationship or some type of relationship dynamic with the person who has the opposite preference, is an issue around mutual sharing because extroverts like to communicate along the way, where introverts will usually speak once they've arrived at their conclusion. And so when it comes to trying to make, mutual decision making, or even in settings where there are meetings and we need input from all people, or like we're bouncing ideas around, extroverts are doing that. Sometimes what will happen is introverts will look at the extroverts like, you're very confused. You said this yesterday and now you're saying this today. But what's happening is they're not realizing that extroverts are processing out loud. And they don't realize, sometimes introverts don't realize that. They need to process out loud in certain situations, and sometimes extroverts don't realize that maybe they should process internally first. And so we can see these communication challenges. Same thing with clarity, with that communicating out loud and communicating internally. And then we have issues around one person not listening enough, maybe not being present enough, asking those questions that show active listening, or we have situations where if someone is too high on extroversion, that they're dominating the conversation and not really taking in the feedback from the other people around. So these are just a few communication challenges, but based on this explanation, which one resonates with you the most? Is it introversion or extroversion? So if it's introversion, write I down. If it's extroversion, write E down. So we have three more categories to go through, and at the end of this presentation, you should have four letters, and that will help give you an idea of what your personality type is based off this self-estimate. So the second category is how we process information, and this is a mental process known as sensing and intuition. So if you have a preference for sensing, you typically gravitate towards wanting to know the facts and specifics. You typically are detail oriented. You like to adopt a realistic approach. You like to focus on the here and now. You may have an excellent memory. You are constantly gathering information through your five senses, and that contributes to you having being able grounding, being able to recall facts and details that others may not. You often like to use experience as a point of reference. Um, and so I'll just leave that there. Intuition, on the opposite side of the spectrum, like to adopt a more imaginative approach. We look at mental processes that are aligned with more theoretical and conceptual thinking. They like to seek out new ideas. They're looking at the bigger picture and they like to anticipate the future. They're more forward thinking, maybe a little bit more visionary. So, some of the communication challenges here are prioritization of tasks. So, on a team or in maybe like a relationship dynamic, whether it's parenting, whether it's romantic, friendship, whatever that relationship is, and you have the opposite preference of the person in the relationship or on the team, where you'll see some issues is how you want to prioritize things. So those are the preference for sensing, like to put first things first. So they don't like to move to the second thing on the list until they've completed the first thing on the list. Now, those are the preference for intuition, think backwards. So they see the end of something and that's where they start. And so sometimes you're looking when people are opposites in this area, they will look at each other and they'll both be looking at the same picture, but they'll see that picture differently. Um, Now, what else can happen is one person will say, okay, this is the vision. Like, how can you not see this? This is what could potentially happen. I don't know how you can't see how this can turn out. Where the other person is like, we're no, that hasn't happened. We're not there yet. You're like five steps ahead. And so these are some of the challenges you see here. Not enough detail versus too much detail. Those with a preference for intuition, because they look at the bigger picture and they're thinking more abstractly, they're really not into the nitty-gritty details, where those are the preference for sensing, they thrive off those specifics. And so in communication and a whole range of different contexts, you can see this be a challenge. Another challenge here, and I'm not going to go too deep into this because I will go more into these explanations in the course, but unrealistic versus not seeing possibilities. So those are the preference for sensing. Sometimes look at their opposite as they're being unrealistic, where those are the preference for intuition because they see so many options and they see so much potential and limitless possibilities. And they prefer to have options, where those are the preference for sensing. They kind of adopt the mindset like if it isn't broke, why we don't need to fix it. And so these are some of the challenges you see here. So, based off this explanation, which one sounds like you the most? Sensing or intuition? If it's sensing, if you are really like a five senses person, uh, maybe lean towards the S. If you're someone who leans more to the forward thinking, you like to generate possibilities, ideas. There's a lot of creativity that's aligned with intuition. If that sounds more like you, then maybe select the N here. So at this point, you should have two letters, either E or I or S or N. Okay, let's move on to the third category. Now, this is also a mental process. So, sensing and intuition is taking in the information. So, once you have taken in the information, you have to do something with that information. So, you're either drawing a conclusion or making some decision about what you have just taken in. And so, this is known as the thinking and feeling dichotomy. So, if you have a preference for thinking, typically you like to apply logical reasoning. You're looking at you're looking for objectivity most of the time. You tend to be task oriented above all else, and you like to provide constructive criticism, and you like to receive constructive criticism as well. If you are on the other side of this dichotomy, which is feeling, and I want to emphasize that thinking is not better than feeling, it's not superior to feeling. These are both part of the decision-making apparatus. But feeling, those with this preference, they will make their decisions from a place of individual values. They're typically trying to seek harmony. And so I'm not going to say conflict avoidant, but where those with the preference for thinking will maybe like to engage in more debate, those with the preference for feeling will maybe shy away from some of that because they're prioritizing harmony. Those with the preference for feeling look at the subjectivity in situations. They like to focus on relationships more than tasks. And they like to offer encouragement and praise and some of that positive reinforcement more than the thinking type, which is they're more geared towards looking at process improvement and things like that. So the challenges that we see here when people are opposites in this area, being more passive versus being more direct. One may view the other as insensitive or too sensitive. One may view the other as too critical or just encouraging when they don't need to be encouraging. So, and I'll go deeper into this in the course. Um, and it's important to understand that we have a preference for over the other. It doesn't mean that we strictly do one all the time because while you may exercise your preference for thinking in one context, in another completely different context, you may be exercising your preference for feeling. And also, which I'm not going to cover in this video, there are certain things that happen, transitions and things that happen across the lifespan that cause us to fluctuate in these areas. And that's a completely different conversation. But based off this explanation, which one resonates with you the most? Thinking, if you're more objective, more logical, or feeling? One thing I can say here is if you're kind of confused about this one, how do you like to give and receive feedback? Do you like feedback to be direct and, tell me what I'm doing wrong so I can fix it? Or do you like to receive feedback that's more encouraging, where someone is not really in your face with like, you need to fix this, but kind of guides you in a way where you can fix it yourself, but they're not critiquing you and you're not critiquing them. So that kind of helps to differentiate these two. Okay, so let's move to the last category, which is how you approach deadlines. This is known as the judging and perceiving dichotomy. So if you have a preference for, and I hate to use the word judging because it sounds like judgmental, it doesn't have anything to do with that. But if you have a preference for J, you like to plan in advance to ensure goals are achieved. You want to adhere to plans once they are made. So you really don't like to do a whole lot of deviation. And I hate to use the word rigid, but like I said, these are dichotomies. So if you have a preference for something, you may be like way on very, um, Plan oriented, uh, there's levels to it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But those are the preference for judging. Typically prefer structure and order, and they prefer closure. So they like things to be finalized as soon as possible so they can move on to the next thing. So those are the preference for perceiving. They are comfortable with uncertainty. They're very comfortable with ambiguity. They prefer flexibility. They like that openness, and they find deadlines energizing and motivating. Where those with a preference for judging with the J, they do their best work in the early stages of a project or an assignment. So if they get something, they like to work on it right away. Those with a preference for perceiving, they do their best work towards the end. So, one of the challenges we see here in communication in teams or in relationships is one person looking at the other like you're a procrastinator, and the other one looking at the other person like you're too uptight. We have much more time. Um, and this is due to those with a preference for J do their best work at the beginning, and then they'll look at everyone else like, okay, you're wasting time, where those are the preference for perceiving. It looks like they're not working. They're they're working, but in their own way. But when they get to the deadline, that's when they're doing their best work. And so what looks like procrastination is not always procrastination. And if you see this on a team, or if you ever have noticed anyone, maybe you are like this, when you are under pressure, you are that person that everyone can go to, or you are, you're pressure prompted. So that being up against the wall, like when your back is up against the wall, that's when you perform, that's when you show up. Everyone's not like that. So there is this distinction between the two, and like I said, it is a spectrum. So, which one resonates with you the most? Either J for judging or P for perceiving. So, at this point, you should have four letters based off these four explanations. And you should have one of these 16 types at this point. Okay. And once we put all of this information together, there is a lot more that can be said about your personality type. And this is what we call a self-estimate, just based off the descriptions. But if you want to take the actual assessment, I am master certified in giving the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And I want to extend the invitation to a course I'm running called Leveraging Personality to Maximize Potential. So, this 4-week online course is designed to increase your self-knowledge so that you can have the clarity you need in your career path, your relationships, and for personal growth. So, this course includes the real MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, personality assessment, which can only be administered by certified practitioners. And there are only 50 spots per session, so click the link below to register before it's too late. This course will definitely empower you, and you can go at your own pace. One thing I want to say, working with type theory and working with teams and individuals, there is a lot of opportunity for growth to wherever you are in your life. If you're making a transition, if you need clarity in your career path, going through this process will really help you. So I hope to see you there. And please let me know if you have any questions. But I hope this explanation was somewhat helpful in giving you a little bit more insight into what these letters actually mean.